Hi everyone, I am recording a screencast video lecture for Module 2, and this is going to be fairly brief, much briefer than last week's, but I'm just going to go ahead and kind of very quickly go through the assignments that you should be doing this week, and then I'll show you where I have my notes on the 3 chapters from the textbooks for this week. So we're in Module 2, and as I talked about in my announcement, you should be reading chapters 3, 6, and 8 for Module 2, and then you've got a couple different writing assignments, and then you have this is not a writing assignment, the APA Where to Find It. This is an assignment that asks you to kind of go through the APA manual, and it asks you where to find stuff. You know, if you want to look at this, what pages on the manual would you find it? And then you submit that in as a file upload. We've got a discussion post this week, the use of personal anecdotes. This is the one where you, this is that, right, mini memoir, talks about it on page 96 of your textbook, and this is where you share a personal anecdote about yourself, about a lesson learned, a personal credo, a memorable day, an embarrassing moment, or a funny incident. So you have a variety of prompts from which to choose, and you want to keep it to no more than 350 words. It's asking you to try to remember to use active verbs rather than passive verbs. So it is also asking you to think about your actual writing style, and it's not asking you to engage in rhetoric, but it is reminding you that this is kind of a why and kind of more of a how effective memoirs, in your case mini memoirs, are constructed, and that's through establishing or appealing effectively to those 3 rhetorical appeals that our textbook talks about in chapter 3, and that's ethos, pathos, and logos. But you don't have to talk about those in this in your personal anecdote. And then this is a discussion, so like I've talked about, it's one that you're going to want to post earlier in the week, and then go back and you will want to respond to at least 2 of your classmates to their own personal anecdotes. So that's that assignment, and then we've got the Learn and Share assignment. This is the using the sense details. So this one is basically going to ask you to think about your sensory details, right? Smell, hearing, sight, taste, and touch. And it's kind of a lead-in to the profile of a place assignment because, right, it's saying you're going to be asked to profile or describe a place you have visited. Think about a possible place that you might write about for the writing a profile of a place assignment, and then do this exercise as kind of a warm-up to that writing a profile of a place assignment. And so then it gives you these individual prompts that you want to complete. So for your posting, you want to provide the place and then list 1 detail for each sense, right? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. So this is a learn and share activities. You don't have to respond to your classmates versus the discussion assignments, although you're more than welcome to respond to classmates and engage them in any type of conversation you think. So that's that exercise, and then you have the actual writing assignment, which is the writing a profile of a place, and this one is a critical reflection on profiling a place or describing a place. So it says the primary purpose to inform readers about, and you can choose, right, a person, a place visited, or an event attended. So you want to choose one of those things and then do these things down here. And so this includes writing between 4 to 450 words I definitely encourage you to write in paragraphs. So you don't want to submit just, even though it's shorter, because this does require a thesis statement, you're probably going to want to break this up into at least 2 paragraphs, if not 3. I think anything more than 3, the paragraphs are just going to be too short, with something as short as 4 to 450 words. But then you do have to have that thesis statement, and then talking about those sensory details, bringing attention to the uniqueness of the place, and then present a portrait of the place through a specific angle of vision, so conveying a dominant attitude toward the subject, that type of stuff. This down here talks about the probability that you can do research to help with your writing a profile of a place, although you don't have to include outside sources. And it just says that if you do use a source, like you don't, because we haven't yet really officially gone into APA, like what APA looks like, you don't, like, if you do use a source, just do your best to cite it, and it's just saying that if you use a source and you do no attempt to cite it, that's when the grade deductions will come in. And you're welcome to use first person. The trick about first person is that you don't want to abuse it, so you don't want to overuse it. So that's the assignment. Some things that I did, so again, if you click on discussions, just like I did for Module 1, I did the same thing for Module 2, and you scroll down, you'll see that I uploaded or created, I'm not sure what the verb is for this, Module 2, the chapters 3, 6, and 8 notes. So these are my notes on the readings for this week, and I'm not going to go through them because this would take me probably like a good 40 minutes to go through all of my notes. So I'm going to trust you guys as students and as learners to read the chapters or peruse the chapters and then look at my notes as kind of supplemental material, because I do add to what Dively talks about, and one of my main purposes in taking these notes about the chapters is to basically be like, this is what she's trying to do in this chapter, because Dively doesn't always come out and say, here's why I'm talking about this. So that's part of my goal in taking these notes, is explaining this is what she's attempting to do, this is how this is connected to the work that we're doing this particular week, right? So but just to briefly go through it, so chapter 3 in rhetorical situations, this is where she introduces you to the concept of rhetoric, and then those 3 rhetorical appeals, the ethos, logos, and pathos. And then one of the really important takeaways from this chapter is the concept of the rhetorical intention and what she calls the conceptual space. And I talk about how the conceptual space is more commonly referred to as a discourse community. And I'm trying to see where I have that up here. But maybe I know I have it in my example. And I give examples of things too. So, yes, this is where I write it in my example. So, right, I say she talks about conceptual space a lot, and I say it's referred to more commonly as discourse communities. And discourse it's a term I use a lot, and it's similar to ideology, but slightly different. It's this idea that language is, because I'm what's called a post-structuralist, so I very much believe in discursivity. So discourse is, on the very low level, discourse just means talking. So like you can have a discourse with somebody, but on a more theoretical level, discourse is this idea that language is the only way that we understand our existence, and that without language we would be completely lost, so our identities and our existence are informed solely through language, and language itself is symbols. So we're constantly talking through symbols. So everything in our life is a metaphor, everything in our life is a symbol. And this goes way back to Plato's allegory of the cave, if anybody has ever read the allegory of the cave. But it's the same idea that everything in life is experienced through symbols, and because of that we're never able to actually reach the real, because the real is occluded through symbols. So it's a very theoretical thing, but essentially, if I can boil it down a little bit, discourse is this idea that everything we know is everything within a particular context is constructed through language, and language is what creates everything in terms of how we experience the world. So, and we call those discursive discursive elements of an environment or culture. And I give the example of the military. So that's a particular conceptual space and discourse community. So there's a lot of discursive elements to the military, and because I'm not part of that conceptual space and or discourse community, I don't understand it. So because I don't have the language, I don't understand, and even things like dress and behavior and hierarchies and anything like that, that's all dictated by language. And because I have not been introduced to that language and I don't understand that language, I don't understand that conceptual space. And so I am not part of that discourse. Whereas a lot of you are probably members of that conceptual space and discursive environment. So, so she talks a lot about conceptual space, and what I say is this is really about discursivity, and this idea of rhetorical intentions is really important. I think it's the most important thing she talks about in her chapter 3, and she gives us this list of the different rhetorical intentions of audience, forum, topic, genre, and the author's purpose and the author's role. And I go through and I give my own kind of explanations of things, and I also give some examples where I think they might be more helpful. And then I go through the different appeals, and again I give examples for the different appeals to try to help explain how those function. This is just a commercial that I use to help explain the appeal to emotion or to pathos. The thing about appeals that sometimes student writers get a little fuzzy on is this idea that, and I think I write it here and in here, is that you can appeal to, just because you might think of something, writing or a commercial or anything like that, some type of advertisement, just because you might think it's ineffective doesn't mean that they're not appealing to ethos, logos, or pathos. So you can appeal to these things, but be unsuccessful or ineffective. So, and you can be effective at logos and successful at pathos, right? So you can have a mixture of things. So it just depends on how you interpret or how you analyze those rhetorical appeals. And then why I think the rhetorical intentions are the most important thing is because they're related to how you're writing. So when you're writing something, right, you have to be aware of what the rhetorical intentions are. And I use the example of like an introduction. So when you're writing an introduction, the introduction itself has specific rhetorical intentions, right? The rhetorical intentions are, I need to provide context for, whatever topic I'm talking about. I have to demonstrate that this is an actual thing by usually incorporating evidence into the introduction. I have to maybe provide definitions. I have to maybe provide some historical context. I have to, if it's an argument, argumentative paper, right, I have to provide evidence and talk about why this is argumentative, and then I also have to do the rhetorical intention of the thesis, which has its own intentions, and then the body paragraphs and the conclusions also have their own specific rhetorical intentions, and that's what I look for when I grade. So if you're writing and you're not aware of your own rhetorical intentions, that's going to make the writing less effective. And so when I'm grading, if you're confused or not clear or not thinking about the rhetorical intentions of your own writing, I, as your reader, am also going to be confused. So, and that's why I say when I'm grading, I look for these things, right? Does the introduction fulfill the rhetorical intentions of an introduction? Chapter 6 is really short, and I didn't have much to say about it. So it's the introduction to texts that inform, and the main thing that she talks about in here are the different genres that go about informing. And so my main takeaway from this chapter is basically that, you know, when you're writing within different genres, you have to be aware of the different rhetorical intentions of the genres. And I do talk about how this goes back to the idea of the conceptual space or discourse community, because the specific genre in which you're writing requires you to understand the unique rhetorical intentions of the genre, and these genres themselves exist in their own conceptual spaces. And then chapter 8 is probably, along with chapter 3, the most beneficial chapters, because chapter 8 is specific to the profile genre itself, and you are writing a profile this particular week, the profile of a place. So I just talk about, you know, here's some things she does. I note page numbers that I think are useful. And but so she goes from chapter 6, which is this more broad kind of conversations about genres and their unique rhetorical intentions. And in this chapter, she's specific to the genre of the profile and the rhetorical intentions of the profile. And also, what does a thesis look like for the profile genre? And the other thing I do here is I give an example of how I would approach the writing a profile of a place assignment. And Dively also mentions on these pages that sometimes, you know, just like our assignment suggests, that outside research sometimes is needed to execute writing a profile, just depending on your topic, but it's not necessary. And so what I do is I take you through I don't write the assignment, I just take you through like what would be called a process draft of it. So I start with a topic, I choose an event, I explain that event, I go through the thesis, and then I give an example of what that thesis would look like, and then I give the page number. This is where Dively talks about the thesis for the profile genre. And then I go through, and this is kind of like, here's the beginnings of how I would start this particular assignment. And then I talk about, you know, in my description of this event, because I chose an event if I were doing this assignment. So what would happen after the introduction and the thesis? And I did say that, note that, you know, my things that I've chosen might differ from what, or probably would differ from you depending on what you're writing for your profile of a place. So I would talk about the place, I would talk about why, because what I chose was hearing Maya Angelou speak at my brother's college graduation in 2002. But I would talk about why she was there, you know, the space, and describe her speech. And then I have some examples of if I did want to bring in outside sources. I found two that I could use. One is a news report about her speech at the college graduation, and one is a video on Maya Angelou singing God Put a Rainbow in the Clouds, which is what she's saying at the beginning of that particular speech. And then I would also talk about my position at that time, because what we really want to do in these types of genres, these more kind of unconventional genres like the profile, is I'm trying to see where I have it so I can show it to you rather than just talk at you. Maybe I say it down here, is the reflection versus critical reflection. So I know I talk about it up here. I have too many notes here. I can't even read through them. Okay. I'm just going to look through really quickly. I think here's where I have it when I talk about the thesis. So that the thesis for this is similar to a critical reflection, and critical reflection itself is a genre. So I tend to talk about profile. Dively does not, but I talk about profile in terms of critical reflection versus reflection. And so I say that, reflection is you reflecting on an event for no critical reason. It's just for the purpose of you kind of telling a story, versus using reflection as a means to analyze why someone or something caused something to happen and understanding why through reflection. So that's easier to do for a thesis and to give ultimate kind of like, here's the purpose of why I'm talking about this thing, right? This event. And so down here, I talk about reflection versus critical reflection. So I said if I just talked about the above bullet points, that would just be reflection, right? I'm going to tell you about this time that I heard Maya Angelou speak just for the sake of telling you the story. Versus if I was doing a critical reflection, it would be, I'm reflecting on hearing her speak to talk about how that was a turning point in my life and why. And I emphasize these because doing the critical reflection thesis is much easier because it gives more purpose to the sense of what you're writing. And if you don't have that sense of purpose or, sense of argumentative trajectory in your thesis, the overall writing can kind of just fall apart, because then it's kind of like, why am I reading this? You're just kind of telling me things. So, this is just a tool to give you as a way to approach the profile of place assignment that I think is a little bit easier than strictly the way it's talked about in the assignment criteria. So those are my notes for the chapters. And the last thing I'm going to show you is that under modules, I did add, and it's just before module 1, I added this handouts and resources module that I'll probably add a few different things to, but I did add this handout that I created. It's called the Visual Guide to an Academic Essay. And I'm adding it now, even though you're not writing an academic essay right now, because all of these things talk about the rhetorical intentions of the different parts of an essay. So it's just to give you maybe more explanation of what do rhetorical intentions look like, what are rhetorical intentions, right? And so it talks about like, okay, the introduction should be kind of in this shape, and this is how we get it to be in that shape, by following these rhetorical intentions. And then it does the same thing for the body paragraph, right? These are the rhetorical intentions of the body paragraph, and then these are the rhetorical intentions for the conclusion. So you can look at this now, but it will definitely become more helpful when we get into the classical argument paper. So that's everything I have for you right now. I hope the assignments are going well. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions, and I hope you guys have a great week. Okay, bye-bye.